All right, what's up, everybody? So maybe a week or so ago, I released my video, 3 questions for ballers, about flight path from Anchorage, Alaska to Mexico City, Mexico. And I mapped it out over a rotating sphere, such as we're told we live on, and asked 3 specific questions that I'll show you in this presentation. Well, I got a response from Bob the Science Guy. So I'm going to go over his response. It's kind of long. I tried to cut out as much of the smugness as possible, but you still might want to go and grab a couple beers, maybe a 5th of whiskey, some Tylenol, whatever will dull your senses enough to sit through this. But I think there's some good stuff here. In my opinion, basically an admission that the Earth is stationary. We can work with that and go from there. But I'll go through the clips and talk about them. Stop them when I see fit. Cool. Here we go. So he starts off, he titled the video Brian Mullins Revised. Is that what it said? Brian Mullins Revised. Yeah. And then has my name down here. He had contacted me before he put this video out and said he was going to review it, but he wasn't going to link to my channel or link to me because he didn't think I deserved credit for it because it's a 5-year-old argument. Well, regardless of how old the argument is, it's still solid and it still hasn't been answered to my satisfaction. So I don't know if he's just trying to get more views by throwing Brian Mullins in there, but thank you, Bob. I'll take that as a compliment. So well done. And Snake Eye Bob's coming at us. I'd love to hear what his rationale is for putting this Snake Eye avatar in here.
Flat Earther Brandon Toy on his 3 questions for ballers.
Yeah, and this is the video, if you're looking for it on my channel, that he's talking about. And I'm just going to go through these slides and just give you a really high-level overview. You can go and watch the detailed one, which was presented on Randy's if you want. But let me just click through this here. So we're talking about this flight is an actual flight from July 22nd of this year from Anchorage to Mexico City. And what I did was I mapped it out into 5 different legs. The start, the second leg, the third leg, the fourth leg, and the end. And you'll notice here that the start is up in Russia. What I did was hold the flight path constant as the Earth rotated underneath it. So it's not that I think the flight starts off in the middle of Russia here. I know it doesn't. It started in Anchorage. It's that Anchorage moved this 103.5 degrees during the flight. So what was now the area that was Anchorage is now in the middle of Russia. And the plane has moved along with the rotating Earth all the way over here to where Mexico City started. You'll see where the difference is between this actual path, which I refer to as the total flight through space, and the actual flight path, which you're going to see several times in here. All right, and then I asked these 3 questions. Bob's going to read them later on, but I want you to notice all the data that is given down below, and this is enough to figure out how I calculated all these numbers. There is nothing secret about the way I did it. It was all based on globe model math and just calculating the geodetic distance from point to point that the airplane moved through space with the rotating Earth. That was the whole point of this thing, to see how far it actually went through space, taking into account the momentum from Anchorage, Alaska, and then figuring out the required engine speed or output to match the speed of the Earth. Because obviously at 60 degrees north, the speed of the Earth is only 513 miles per hour. And down in Mexico City, it's a lot faster. So the plane has to catch up to the momentum in order to match the speed of the ground where it lands. At least that was my theory, and that's what I was asking questions about. So that was the first question. The second question just showed this generic flight path over the Earth. And then the third question asked about the return flight which would be from Mexico City to Anchorage. And it would turn out to be a lot shorter flight because you can take advantage of the fact that you're starting from 20 degrees north, where the ground speed is a lot faster, the rotational speed, than in Anchorage, Alaska. So you're kind of just sailing up here. That was the ideal. So I asked about, fuel efficiency considerations and how pilots plan for this, and basically tell us about how you take into account the fact that the Earth is rotating. What considerations do pilots need to make? That's the gist of all these questions. And I haven't gotten a satisfactory answer. Certainly not in this presentation, but I'll let you be the judge of that.
Now, because this is not an original...
Oh, okay. So, yeah, Bob's talking really fast. What I did here was, for the next about minute and a half, this is all the insults that Bob hurled condensed. So I think that's probably the main point of Bob's videos, because there isn't much substance to them, is to just hurl as many insults and ridicule at me as possible. And the reason for that is very simple. That is a tactic used by psychological operators to demoralize their targets. Very simple. It doesn't have to be a grand conspiracy. It doesn't even have to be working for anybody. This ridicule is a powerful weapon that's used by people to take down their enemies. So Bob throws plenty of smugness and ridicule in this video, and I'm just going to let this minute and a half play, and you can get an idea of the kind of stuff that was hurled at me. Now, somebody more sensitive, somebody that's not used to the criticism from these guys, may have this experience and hear these response videos and just be totally turned off, never want to make another video again. I could completely see that a younger person who's not, as sure of themselves, hasn't been through as much, just getting mentally destroyed by something like this. Most of the people who are in Flat Earth and publicly speak about Flat Earth are used to that.
No idea. Brandon doesn't get any credit for doing this video, and he's not getting any links in the description. This is a...
Bob acts like his links are gold that he's passing out.
A classic Flat Earth argument, and he's just saying it again after we've explained it to him 20 or 30 times.
I'm not sure what Bob's talking about. Explained it to me 20 or 30 times. I assume he's just speaking generally, but I've never had a discussion with Bob about this particular subject.
What we'll do is we'll have a listen to him, he'll describe his little conundrum here, and then we'll show where his logic just goes completely off the rails, and have a little fun with him. Oh.
So you got to wonder about his audience who listens to stuff like this and hears him cutting these other people down. Are they, oh, yeah, we're smarter. Like, does it feed their ego, or does it reassure them that their view of the world is correct? I just wonder about the people who actually follow and listen to Bob the Science Guy, what they're like.
Oh dear God, Brandon, did you do any research for this? So, like almost every flat earther I've ever talked to, right here is where he makes his complete lapse of logic. This is a concept that flat earthers do not and cannot understand because they have to support their narrative. And quite frankly, that's too bad. Next time, Brandon, before you sit down and make a fool of yourself like this, why don't you talk to a pilot like me or Wolfie or Blue, and we'll explain.
Yeah, I'm a pilot. I know what's going on. You don't. You should defer to us, our authority on the subject. And you really don't need to ask any questions, because we'll tell you all about reality and what's really going on. So just go ahead and give us a ring. We'll let you know. You don't have to worry about it anymore. You don't have to do your own thinking. You don't have to think critically about anything. You can just call us up and we'll tell you the truth.
Explain it to you so you don't look like an idiot. But it's kind of fun.
And he continues to call me an idiot and all that. I'm just going to let the rest of them play. But, I could talk probably for hours about the kind of little tactics these guys use to try to bring people down.
Having you look like an idiot. And quite frankly, that's too bad. Next time, Brandon, before you sit down and make a fool of yourself like this, why don't you talk...
By the way, I think he says this a couple times, and I cut it out a couple times.
Talk to a pilot like me or Wolfie or Blue, and we'll explain it to you so you don't look like an idiot. But it's kind of fun having you look like an idiot. So I don't see where your problem is, other than the fact you can't do math. So despite the...
So all of the math that is done is using the geodetic calculator. I don't know if Bob didn't follow the argument I was making or willfully disregarded the argument I was making, but he shows no signs that he understood what it was that I was saying in this presentation. It's like it didn't register it, or he didn't want to acknowledge it and address it.
The fact you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about and no clue as to how to figure it out, let's watch you flounder some more. But you didn't look at the corrections. Why is that? Now, here's my thought on it. It's because you have a flat earth narrative that you have to believe. This is a
theme that he goes over and over again, is this: you have a narrative that you need to feed, and that's why you say what you do. You're not trying to find out the truth. You're just a cultist who's trying to brainwash themselves, something like that. They say this a lot. Bob says it maybe 3 times throughout his 2 videos. So it's more bullshit.
A very important thing to you. You will not listen to anybody that tells you differently. You have to keep repeating the same story, not to convince us, but to convince yourself. And quite frankly, Brandon, that's really sad that a grown man has got to think that way. But he felt the need to do this again, so I just went out and brushed it off, explained the truth, and there it is. You can believe it if you want to believe in reality, or you can continue your little flat earth fantasy. That's on you.
You notice on this map...
All right, here's where we actually get into the quote-unquote substance of Bob's arguments. This is from the first video. I don't know if I'll be able to tell when it switches over, but I think Bob says something. So we'll see when it switches over. But just keep in mind, this map that he's showing right here is just to show where the cities are on the globe, on the map. Here's Anchorage. Here's Mexico City. That's the entire purpose of this slide.
Which is a projection of the globe. He's got a straight line from Anchorage, Alaska, which is actually over here, down to Mexico City. Notice the path that this straight line takes. But what's the actual Great Circle course, the shortest distance between these 2 points? Let's go, instead of looking at a map.
The accuracy of this map has no bearing whatsoever on the questions or the analysis that I did. Like I said, this was just to show the flight path on the map. And obviously I'm aware that this is a globe map.
Let's go look at flight planning software, which we can all do. So this is SkyVector.
Okay, this is first of maybe, I don't know, a handful of times that he brings up this SkyVector. I think he might be angling for a promotional gig with these guys. I wouldn't be surprised if Bob's churned out a couple of emails to the marketing department of SkyVector.com, or maybe he's even associated with SkyVector.com, saying, hey, I can push you in my videos. I've got whatever number of subscribers if you'll give me this much, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you'll see it a couple times in here. Kind of funny.
.com, and here is the actual Great Circle course between these 2 points. Notice that it pretty much goes over Seattle, Washington, and it kind of hugs the coast. And the aircraft will follow this magenta line all the way down. Goes right over Seattle, Washington.
Now he's showing the exact flight path that I used for the analysis. So he's going to show me how to get the flight path using some tool that's not associated with the actual flight. And then he's going to show my slide, which is the actual flight path. I have no idea what his point is here, just other than to give the impression that I didn't know what I was talking about regarding the flight's path.
Washington. It's not out here in the Pacific Ocean, and it's not a straight line. It's a curve. Now, why are these little bumps in the curve? Well, that may have had to do something with this weather right here. Maybe they went over to the side of it to avoid it a little bit. And they're also...
Now he's showing off his flight knowledge.
Also listening to air traffic control, who may vector them around some flights or other weather or things like that. But pretty much it follows this Great Circle course. And this is what a Great Circle course is. Later on, you'll see how he's confused about what a Great Circle course is.
I'm not confused about a Great Circle course. I used their calculator based on Vincenti's equation for all of the distances that I used in the analysis. So they were all Great Circle distances. If he had paid attention to my presentation, he would know that there's no confusion about Great Circle courses.
First of all, this isn't a stationary sphere. This is an AE map centered on the North Pole.
No shit. It's not even an AE map. It's just the top. Again, I don't know what his point is to point this out.
And you're looking primarily at the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere would continue out. Once again, you have drawn...
The southern hemisphere would continue out. Yeah, it would continue out as a circle.
On a straight line with a ruler between these 2 points. Now, why is that somewhat like the Great Circle course? Well, let me tell you. If you went directly from the North Pole straight down to Mexico City, you would follow a Great Circle course. As you move off the North Pole a little bit, you start getting...
So you'll notice how that straight line almost follows the path from the actual flight. I thought that was good enough. I'm just showing a general flight path from one city to the other. This is just the beginning of the presentation where I show the path on a stationary Earth here. So I don't know why he's talking about this.
Getting an error with that, but it's really not all that far. And you're really quite far north here. And you're kind of following that north-south line, which is the entire purpose of your video here. Now, there's a couple of other things that I want to bring to your attention. At this latitude, the Earth is rotating at a certain speed according to your chart. Down at Mexico City, it's rotating at a different speed. It's about 500 miles an hour different between these 2 points. Now, this flight took 420 minutes. That means that over 420 minutes, you had to deal with that rotational change of 500 miles.
Okay, so he does understand it, that you have to deal with the rotational change. Now, let's hear what he has to say about it.
That's really not the problem that you think it is, but let's see what you think the problem is.
Well, I'm going to rotate in each of the following pictures for the amount of rotation that takes place on the spinning ball Earth. And we're going to trace out the actual flight path through space and talk about the speeds through space that would be required in order to make this flight.
So if I'm sitting up here in an airplane on the ground at the Ted Stephenson Airport and I don't move, am I rotating with the Earth at Ted Stephenson Airport? Yes, I am. So I've got a rotational speed just by virtue of being there. I also have a rotational speed when I'm sitting on the ground in Mexico City. I think that we all can agree with that. As I
Not really, but that's the premise of the analysis.
Take off from Ted Stevens, when I'm a foot off the ground, I'm still moving with that rotational speed. So I start heading south and I'm following this line, the course line for the flight path. So at any point along this course line, if I was sitting on the ground, I would be moving at the rotational speed of the Earth at that point on the ground. If I'm a foot off the ground, I'm also moving at that rotational speed. And if I'm 31,000 feet off the ground over that point, I'm still rotating at the same speed as that point.
Okay, so we're going to listen to this one more time because I think this is very important, what he says here. This is what I was talking about when I said there's basically an admission here that the Earth is stationary. So he's saying that if I'm sitting on the ground or I'm on the ground following this path, I'm moving at the rotational speed of the Earth at any latitude along this line. If I'm 1 foot off the ground and I flew this path, I'd still be moving at the rotational speed of the ground below me. And finally, he says if I'm 31,000 feet off the ground, I'm moving with the rotational speed of the Earth below me. Okay? So he's essentially saying that it doesn't matter whether you're on the ground or not, you're always going to be rotating at the speed that the Earth below you is rotating. He'll get into not much more about this, but he'll repeat this in a couple different ways throughout this thing.
And that happens as I go down this.
Now listen to this. This is really critical here.
Flight path. As I follow this flight path, I pick up the rotational speed of the Earth on the ground along that flight path.
Okay. I'm going to let it play one more time, just so you can hear what his argument is here. Let me see where this is. We'll just
I'm a
start.
foot off the ground. I'm still moving with that rotational speed. So I start heading south, and I'm following this line, the course line, for the flight path. So at any point along this course line, if I was sitting on the ground, I would be moving at the rotational speed of the Earth at that point on the ground. If I'm a foot off the ground, I'm also moving at that rotational speed. And if I'm 31,000 feet off the ground over that point, I'm still rotating at the same speed as that point. And that happens as I go down this flight path.
That happens as I go down this flight path. What happens?
As I follow this flight path, I pick up the rotational speed of the Earth on the ground along that flight path.
As I follow this flight path, I pick up the rotational speed of the ground along that flight path. How exactly, by what mechanism, are you picking up the rotational speed of the ground below you as you fly through the atmosphere?
Now, the logical error that Brandon and flat earthers make is
Now he's going to insist that I'm making a logical error here.
they assume that the instant I leave the ground right here, I've come to a dead stop and the Earth is rotating underneath me.
Now, this is just a flat-out lie. In those calculations, in that table that I showed you before, I gave the airplane credit for the rotational speed on the ground at Anchorage, Alaska. So I gave it that full 513 miles per hour, the entire flight down to Mexico City. That's the crux of the entire question. When it gets down to Mexico City, I believe it's like 979 miles per hour is the rotational speed at 20 north. How did it pick up that additional momentum along the way? As Bob said, it picks it up from the ground in order to match the speed of the Earth and arrive at the destination. That's the question. So there's no logical error. I gave it the momentum that it gained from being up here rotating with Anchorage, Alaska.
There's something called conservation of angular momentum. So as soon as I leave the ground, I still have the angular momentum I had on the ground. It's not like the instant I left the ground, I suddenly shoot to the west at 500 miles an hour.
No shit. As I just got done saying, there is nothing in my presentation that would give you the impression that I thought once you got up into the air, you lost all of your momentum. Now, in reality, on a rotating sphere, I have no idea what would happen. I personally think, well, I'm not going to say that. I think that you wouldn't pick up momentum in an atmosphere from a solid rotating beneath you. That's why I'm asking these questions, because it doesn't logically make sense. It seems to violate the law of physics. Now, Bob's answer is that it picks up momentum from the ground beneath it as it goes towards higher rotational speed. How does it pick it up, Bob?
It just does.
These guys just invoke this term, conservation of angular momentum, as if that covers everything. So the other one that they love to bring up is reference frames. Like, well, if I say conservation of angular momentum and reference frames, then this problem goes away.
It doesn't work that way. I'm literally directly above the ground and I'm still rotating with the Earth, even up at 31,000 feet. It follows a path along the surface of the Earth. It's called a ground track. So when we look...
Yeah, so I'm well aware of ground tracks and how they follow a path. They would determine their location above the Earth based on what's below them. That's no doubt that that's what they do. No doubt that this plane hit all of the waypoints down this pink path, or on that other chart on the real path, as it went down to Mexico City. It's a matter of how did they do that? I know they hit the waypoints that I laid out. How did they hit the waypoints? How did they gain the additional momentum to make it to their target and hit those waypoints?
Look at the flight path of the aircraft. We leave Ted Stevenson Airport up here, and we literally follow this magenta line all the way down to Mexico City. Because I am following a line along the surface of the Earth, my rotational speed, which starts off up here in Alaska, is going to change based on where I am on this magenta line, because I'm following a point on the Earth. I am not following a straight line independent of the Earth and the atmosphere. That's where the flat earthers make their mistake. They think that airplanes somehow fly in a straight line once they get going. They do not. They follow a path along the ground. Now, because they're following this path along the ground, they assume the rotational speed of the Earth at a point on that path as if they were sitting on the ground. Because
let's hear that one more time. Essentially saying the same thing he did before. Let's see if he adds any context to it this time.
A path along the ground. Now, because they're following this path along the ground, they assume the rotational speed of the Earth.
Because they're following a path along the ground. So as long as I follow a path along the ground, I assume the rotational speed of the ground at that location. Is that how it works? That's the mechanism by which the airplane gains momentum? That's interesting.
At a point on that path as if they were sitting on the ground, because they are directly over that point.
Okay, did you see him like swallow hard? I thought this was really funny. I'm going to play that one more time. Just look at his face after he gets done saying this. Does this look like a guy who believes what he's saying?
Directly over that point.
But I put it in there again just because I thought it was hilarious. And then he looks at the screen as if, yep, that's what happens. Just as long as you stay over that spot on the ground, you pick up the momentum from the rotating Earth beneath you as if you're on the ground itself. Do you have to see the ground in order to gain the additional momentum, Bob? Or is there some other magic by way the Earth imparts its momentum on you as you fly over it? As long as you hit that spot, then, you know, obviously you're going to gain that momentum. I'd love to know how and why, Bob. Those would have been good questions to answer. Let's see if you get into it.
This is a concept that flat earthers do not and cannot understand.
What concept? What concept is he talking about? That if you're over a certain spot on the ground, it imparts momentum to you just by being over that spot on the ground, because that's the argument you're making so far.
Because they have to support their narrative.
The whole duration of the trip, the Earth is going to rotate quite a bit. So Mexico City starts off here, if you're looking down on the top of the Earth, and ends up down here. Okay, so actually if they were flying from here to the location in space where Mexico City ends up, their great circle distance would be somewhat like this instead of like this.
Now, once again,
all right, now obviously I don't think that the optimal way to fly that path would be to go across that dotted line. That's just, this slide is just to show the difference between the flight path on a stationary Earth and where they would have to go in order to meet Mexico City at its point where it's rotated to after the 7 hours. That's a pretty big difference. You would think that there would be a difference between the path that you, or the course that you laid out in order to hit this spot down here where Africa is sitting right now, instead of over here where North America is. since North America is going to be down there. But evidently, from what Bob's telling us, is you just treat the Earth as if it's stationary, you fly as if it's stationary, you plan everything as if it's stationary, and the ground gives you the momentum to keep up with the increased speed of the Earth beneath you. Conservation of angular momentum. I did not know that that meant that it gives you additional momentum by just being in a location in space. That's amazing, actually. All right, let's move on.
And Brandon, that's not a great circle course or a great circle distance. The great circle course and the great circle distance would be as if you took a piece of string on a globe and stretched it from Anchorage, Alaska to Mexico City. The distance between those and where that string falls along the globe, when you pull it tight, that's the great circle course.
Again, no shit. I don't know what he thinks my confusion is about great circle courses, but it's like he didn't pay any attention to my presentation. I know B-Ball told him to go ahead and take a look at it and debunk it or whatever. So he just grabbed it, skipped over it, and then put out a couple of bullshit videos.
It has nothing to do with crossing the North Pole. Now the airplane will...
It has nothing to do with crossing the North Pole. He still doesn't get what this is at all. He just doesn't even understand, I don't think.
Will always be over that red line that you drew. The red line will move around, but the airplane...
There he goes. The red line
airplane continues along the red line as it goes down south.
Oh shit, dude. What did you think I was saying? Holy crap, this guy's dense.
Oh, Brandon, I'm afraid you're going to have to show some math on that. But let's go ahead and do it together. Now, he's saying that the plane left Anchorage and then it flew down here to Washington. So let's, instead of put...
Okay, here he goes back to Sky Vector again. There's another nickel in the jar. And what he's going to do is he's going to compare the actual distance from the start to the waypoint 1 that I was talking about with the distance through space, assuming the Earth is rotating, and say, you did the math wrong, you fucking dumbass. Not even understanding what I was trying to say or acting like he didn't understand. So again, just completely off the reservation, half-baked criticism that doesn't make any sense.
Putting Mexico City in here. Let's put in SeaTac in. There's Seattle, Tacoma, which is where his first waypoint is.
So he's just, charting the course directly from Anchorage to Seattle, and he's going to compare it to what I have on the slide.
Now, let's go ahead and have a look at that real quick. Now, the navigation log for that.
Yeah. And he just goes through this, and then he's going to talk about the 2,000 miles I haven't.
2,212 miles? Okay, you see?
All right. So that was total straw man on his part. This is how I derived this distance. I put in the coordinates for Anchorage. Then I put in the coordinates for waypoint 1 and added the 30.75 degrees of rotation. So the location where waypoint 1 is over the Earth has moved 30.75 more degrees. Then I charted the geodetic distance using Vincenti's calculator from the start point to the location where waypoint 1 exists at the time the flight was actually over it. So obviously this isn't a perfect representation of the flight path that the plane took, because it would have been curved. Theoretically, it would not be a straight line. But it's as close as I know how to get with just using 5 waypoints. And it's close enough for this analysis, honestly. No more precision is needed in order to get the point of this presentation across. And you either have to be very dense or willfully dishonest not to understand what I was trying to say with this whole presentation.
212 miles. Okay, you see what he's trying to do here? He's completely disregarding the fact that he's following that flight path along the ground and picking up the momentum of the Earth.
Again, he says it, that you're following the flight path and hence picking up the momentum from the ground.
The speed of the rotation of the Earth has nothing to do with this problem whatsoever. It's the
rotation of the Earth doesn't matter.
The speed across the ground, and that is solely based on the engine speed of the aircraft. He's claimed in 3 hours and...
Yeah, here he catches me with a typo.
62 minutes? 3 hours and 6...
This is the best point that Bob makes in this entire presentation. So kudos, Bob. You got me. I made a typo when I transcribed from decimals to hours. Good job, Bob.
62 minutes, Brandon? Isn't that like 4 hours and 2 minutes? Isn't that the way normal...
Wow, what a fucking genius.
Normal people talk about that? And he claims that he's gone from Anchorage, Alaska, and he's actually got this original dot up here is in Russia now.
Now he's acting like he doesn't know why that dot is up there. Bob, that's where Anchorage was when the flight started. Okay? That's where it actually was in space, and then the Earth rotated. Do you remember how that works in your model? See how Anchorage is down here now? The Earth rotated and Anchorage moved from here to there. All I'm doing is calculating where it moved to on your model. The plane still started here. The Earth rotated, and the plane moved with the rotating Earth to its next waypoint. Do you understand now?
It's out in Siberia. Anchorage, Alaska is way over here.
I mean, just, you would think when he's watching this, he would go, could he really be that dumb to have put this dot in Russia instead of Anchorage? Could he really be? No, let me think about this for a minute. Oh, I get what he's trying to do. He's saying that's where it started. But this guy's ego is so big that he thinks he's so much smarter than everyone that I could be that stupid to put that red dot in the middle of Russia.
Because they've only gone 1,753
Another plug for SkyVector.
miles. And they have followed that magenta line the whole way. And as a result, the aircraft is picking up the rotational speed of the Earth all the way.
And he says it again.
All the way along.
This argument is so powerful for him that he has to say it again and again.
Along this magenta line. It's not independent of the surface. It's following this line along the surface of the Earth.
Okay, so what if it's following the path, Bob? If you follow something that's moving and it's accelerating, do you pick up the momentum from that accelerating object? How do you do that, Bob? If something is rotating underneath you, how do you pick up the momentum? Where does that happen?
It's as simple as that. It's not a difficult concept, Brandon. Maybe they ran into a headwind. Maybe they had to move around that storm. Now, the other thing that's interesting about it is, again, where are you getting these numbers from?
Again, he still doesn't understand where these numbers are derived, even though he has all the data in front of him.
We're following that magenta path.
He repeats it once again.
We're not.
This is, honestly, I feel bad for having this in here multiple times, because this was his entire video, was to say that the plane follows the flight path, the ground track, and picks up the rotational speed from the ground. That's it. That's Bob's whole argument. And then he throws in conservation of angular momentum and poof, everything works just as it should.
We're not starting off out here. Where do you have us starting now? You still have us starting in Russia.
Another clue he could have picked up on there is that the dot, this is the next waypoint, so the dot is now deeper into Russia and the Earth has rotated. So you think you get a clue why that is taking place on my diagrams.
That's Anchorage, Alaska right there. That's where we started. We're following this path right down, and now we're over Los Angeles. Do we have to continue this? Now here's the problem that Brian Mullins had, and you're having as well, Brandon. You seem to...
Look at that smug arrogance. Oh my God. If this guy's a shill, I think they hired him just to irritate us.
To think that you have an airspeed with the aircraft and it has to fly that speed, plus it has to catch up to the Earth. You're not including the fact that the speed of the rotation of the Earth is also added to the airspeed of the aircraft.
Now, see, Bob, I did pick that up. The question is, how does the plane get the additional speed, the additional momentum to keep up with the Earth as it moves along the Earth and the Earth is moving faster?
If you want to do a three-dimensional space thing, that's not how airplanes fly. They fly along the ground and they pick up the rotational speed of the Earth. It took 420 minutes.
Again, he says those words. They pick up the rotational speed of the Earth.
For that aircraft to pick up some 500 miles an hour.
What does picking up rotational speed of the Earth mean? I sound like a broken record because Bob sounds like a broken record. What is the mechanism by which that happens, Bob? Why do you keep saying the same meaningless thing over and over and over again?
In rotational speed. Now that's exactly the same thing as dealing with a 1 mile per hour crosswind in an area where you can...
Now they do this little mathematical trick where they take the difference in speed and divide it by the time that the trip takes. And they say, well, that momentum is picked up in little chunks all along the way. I mean, that's no big deal at all. It's a very small number. So it must be really easy for the plane to gain that additional momentum along the way. How does the plane gain the additional momentum, Bob? You can't gain additional momentum just by turning, can you? Can you just turn? Can you do that with your car? Can you just turn the wheel to the left or the right and it makes you go faster? If I go for a 1,000-mile trip and I just keep turning my wheel to the left or the right, will I gain additional speed along the way? Is that how that works?
You can have up to 140 miles an hour of crosswind. It's unnoticeable.
It's unnoticeable. You're not going to notice this. The ground beneath you is now moving at 460 miles per hour faster than where you started 7 hours ago. That's no big, it's trivial. It's no big deal. Oh, and by the way, it's not linear. It increases as you go further south.
And the fact that they're following that path along the ground means that they just simply pick it up as they go.
The fact that they follow it along the ground means that they just simply pick it up as they go.
It's unnoticeable. And the fact that they're following that path along the ground means that they just simply pick it up as they go. Their course is along the ground. It's not through space without regard to the surface of the Earth or the atmosphere.
Yeah, no shit. Obviously, they are following the waypoints along the ground. In either model, that's true.
That's where you're making your mistake, and that's
not a mistake at all.
That's where Brian made the mistake and was corrected. You should have looked at the corrections. But, well, hi everyone, and greetings.
All right, so that was the first video, and I apologize for putting you through that. This next portion is not as long, and Bob still repeats himself quite a bit, so I apologize for that. Again, he gets Brian Mullins' name in the title, He probably thought he could pick up some additional flat Earth views if he threw Brian Mullins in there. So he's still using Brian Mullins' clout after, I don't know, how long has Brian been gone? 2-3 years? And Bob's still trying to use his clout to gain views. That's pretty sad, dude.
From Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy. You know, I'd like to do a short follow-up on my video from yesterday about Brandon Toy's ripoff of Brian.
Now, he accused me of ripping Brian Mullins off. I don't give a shit if a Brian made the exact same presentation. The question hasn't been answered. That's what you don't get, Bob. You guys haven't answered the question satisfactorily. Do things move along with the atmosphere and, as you say, pick up the speed of the rotating Earth beneath them? So no consideration needs to be given to the fact that the ground speed of the Earth changes as you move along it? Or do objects deviate from the Earth when they go north or south? You guys have to pick, because there's a very clear contradiction between those two things that you're hand-waving away with really no explanation at all, except you threw in a couple terms. Angular momentum, and I don't know if you said it in this presentation, I think so, but I'm sure you're going to invoke reference frames as well. Well, let's just get this over with and see what you have to say.
Brian Mullins and his little plane over the rotating Earth conundrum. Now, sometimes when I do videos on flat earthers, they stomp their little feet and get all upset in the comments section of the video. Brandon fell right into that, and while it's very amusing to me to watch a grown adult have a temper tantrum, I thought maybe we would address some of his comments. So,
now watch this comment that he shows, and you tell me if this is someone stomping their feet and throwing a temper tantrum.
let's cue up the music. And okay, so here's the internal comment section on the video. And as you see, Brandon Toy came in and said, I didn't answer the 3 questions, fail.
Does that sound like a temper tantrum to you? You're such a liar, Bob. Do you even notice that you lie anymore? Or when you open your mouth and when you're thinking, you don't notice? Or are you cognitive of the fact that you lie constantly?
I think this is just great. Now, the reason, Brandon, I didn't answer your 3 questions is that I destroyed the basis of your questions during the course of the video.
By destroying the basis of my questions, if you mean that you said that a plane flying over the rotating Earth picks up the momentum as it moves along the ground, okay, I wouldn't consider that destroying, but let's continue.
You just lack the insight and the understanding of the subject to see how badly I did that.
Ah, there's the credo of globe believers and, or I should say, globe trolls and angsty teenagers everywhere. You just don't understand. Good one, Bob.
Now, as you may recall, the entire basis of Brandon's argument was that once the aircraft left the ground in Anchorage, Alaska, it became completely detached from the rotating surface of the Earth, and the atmosphere somehow wasn't rotating either. And
okay, no. One, when a plane leaves the ground, it is not attached to the ground anymore. All right, just to let you know that that is true. When a plane leaves the ground, it's no longer attached, so it is detached from the ground. But this whole idea that I didn't take that into consideration is, again, another lie.
And as a result, the aircraft had to follow this elaborate flight path over some 8,000 miles in space.
Now, this wouldn't be an elaborate flight path to follow. This is the actual flight path through space that this plane took. It's mapped out along 5 waypoints, and I showed the general path between each waypoint that the plane had to take in order to meet the next waypoint. If you're on a rotating Earth, which we're not, but if you are on a rotating Earth, This is what the plane would have to do, Bob. This is your model. All I did was map out your model and ask you how it works.
I think I rather conclusively demonstrated this is not the case in the first video. Let me show you the actual flight path of that aircraft. Now this...
Look at how full of it this guy is. I mean, does he think that his audience is stupid enough to believe the stuff that he's saying? Honestly. When he says that a plane just picks up the momentum from the ground, does his audience go, oh yeah, dumb flirt? You know, maybe people aren't as stupid as you think, Bob.
This is skyvector.com. Now, that took 7 hours, and I believe in the actual...
Another plug.
It was a little bit longer because they had to divert for some weather down by Los Angeles or Las Vegas.
All right, now he finally gets to the questions. Let's hear him smash.
Number one, the flight covered 8,183 miles in 6 hours and 54 minutes. Its average speed was 1,186 miles.
That's close
an hour. At 60 degrees north, they inherited 513 miles per hour in momentum.
That just goes against what he's been saying this entire time, that I didn't consider the momentum
on the plane. Probably used the word momentum wrong, so I'll hear about it.
I don't think I actually did use the word momentum.
In order to meet the reported and required ground speeds at each waypoint, the plane must increase its speed in space.
Look at that dumb look on his face. Look at how self-satisfied this smug bastard is. Holy shit, dude.
Space. During the last leg of the trip, the plane's engine must provide an average of 850 miles per hour worth of power in order to accelerate to the 1,363 miles an hour.
Now, as you may recall, the entire basis of Brandon's argument was that...
Okay, if you're feeling like you're having deja vu, you're not. He actually repeated this section twice in his video. So this is straight from the video, and I'm just playing it again just to show you how sloppy his video is.
That once the aircraft left the ground, it became completely detached.
That's how little respect he has for his viewers. He just throws this shit together, lies to them, does half-ass analysis, calls it a debunking, throws a little smugness on top, throws a couple of lies in, and then pats himself on the back. What a loser.
From the rotating surface of the Earth, and the atmosphere somehow wasn't rotating either. And as a result, the aircraft had to follow this elaborate flight path over some 8,000 miles in space. Now, this is skyvector.com.
I'll spare you.
Back of the aircraft is this magenta line. The airplane continuously followed this magenta line all the way from Anchorage.
All right, I just want to point out that each of the waypoints that I plotted were the exact positions that the plane was in at those exact times that was used in the analysis. So for those 5 waypoints, the ground track of the airplane was correctly identified on each of the slides. What he's talking about is how the flight would be shown on a stationary Earth. I was trying to represent how the plane flew above a rotating globe. Bob doesn't seem to understand this because he probably spent 5 minutes looking at my video.
This magenta line. The airplane continuously followed this magenta line all the way from Anchorage, Alaska, down to Mexico City, and with that slight variation for weather.
Yeah, he keeps mentioning this weather as if he's some kind of genius for thinking that, you know, the path zigzagged a little bit, so it must have been weather. It's just another way for him to say that he's a pilot. That's what I think. He just wants everybody to know that he's a pilot, so don't forget
out in this part of the world. It started in Anchorage, Alaska, and it ended up in Mexico City. So this nonsense that you put up, that's not the flight path. It never was the flight path.
Those 5 points on that map right there are the exact flight path. Those are the exact points in space that the plane had to fly through and meet if we're on a rotating globe.
So your entire question is moot because it covered the exact distance that is expected and in the amount of time that was expected, which was about 7 hours. So there's your first question answered.
Question number 2.
Fail.
2. The route taken for the flight isn't the optimal route. It is the geodetic Great Circle route based on a stationary Earth. This is the route that you would plan if we were on a stationary flat plane or a stationary globe, essentially.
Well, that's your problem right there, Brandon. This is not the Great Circle course between Anchorage, Alaska, and Mexico.
Again, he's going to nitpick the fact that I didn't show the exact geodetic course on this little mock-up here. As if that has any bearing on the questions that were asked.
Mexico City. This is something that you put out based on your flat Earth narrative.
And by the way, regardless of how that looked on that little picture there, I used all the data from the exact flight that we're talking about. This is a real flight. This isn't something that I made up.
So while you made up the other route, here's the actual route from flight planning.
I didn't make up any route. I looked it up. This is a real flight that took place on July 22nd. So again, you're lying, Bob.
Software along the Great Circle course between Anchorage, Alaska, and Mexico City. So the fact that you put up the wrong route and ground track for that flight doesn't change the fact that this is the correct one and the flight followed it.
You know what's actually funny is the route he's showing right here is less correct than the route that I used in the presentation, because my route was the actual route taken by the plane, Bob. It was the very same route that the plane reported taking.
And the speeds and the times all matched up given the airspeed of the aircraft that you provide.
Yep, they matched up to my analysis. That's correct.
Why don't the pilots of the flight take the rotation of the Earth into account when planning their flight and go a different heading? Why is their flight path the same as it would be on a stationary Earth?
Is that not a legitimate question to ask? Why wouldn't we see a different flight path than the straight line route if the Earth is rotating around? Seems like a legitimate question to me.
Well, they don't take the rotation of the Earth into account because, truthfully, they don't need to. It has no bearing on their ground track. What they do is they plot this flight out and they follow the ground track. You're not controlling it based on the rotation of the Earth. You're controlling it based on the fact that the ground track is directly below your aircraft. So long as you keep that ground track directly below your aircraft, the rotational speed of the Earth, etc., is just imparted on your aircraft. Now recall.
Okay, so that's a new wording for him of the same argument that he's been giving you. Now the ground speed of the Earth is imparted on the plane.
Controlling it based on the rotation of the Earth, you're controlling it based on the fact that the ground track is directly below your aircraft. So long as you keep that ground track directly below your aircraft, the rotational speed of the Earth, etc., is just imparted on your aircraft. Now recall, Brandon.
All right.
Aircraft flight. You would have to account for some 500 miles per hour of increased rotation of the Earth. Okay, that's fine. That's kind of the basis of the Coriolis effect. However, in order to make that flight, it took some 420 minutes.
So this is the first time that I remember him acknowledging the Coriolis effect and how that would come into play here. Up to now, he's just been saying essentially that the plane is gifted the additional momentum by ensuring that it is above a point on the Earth.
Which meant that on average, every minute, you had to account for what is essentially a crosswind of about 1.5 miles or 2 miles an hour. This in an environment that has crosswinds of up to 140 miles an hour. You wouldn't even notice that you were doing this. It's kind of like maintaining your car on the road. You make small, tiny little corrections just to kind of keep it in the center of your lane. That is how...
What he is describing is essentially the same as flying over a stationary Earth. That's what he's saying right here. He's saying you don't even need to worry about it. You just turn the wheel a little here, a little there, make tiny little corrections, and ta-da, you catch up to the Earth as you go south, or you slow down as you go north. That momentum just kind of works itself out by just following the flight path. There's no increased acceleration required. There's no need to catch up or plan for a longer flight when you go south, or a shorter flight when you go north. There's no difference in the amount of fuel it takes. It just kind of happens as you're going along naturally, and you don't need to be concerned with it. I find that very interesting.
How pilots account for the rotation of the Earth when they're flying an aircraft, even a high-speed aircraft like a 747. Glad I could clear that up for you.
So the optimal flight plan, if they were going from one, would be something like this. But really, their flight plan would probably be somewhere in the middle. They'd actually go at a different heading, not head straight towards Mexico City, so that they can, optimize their arc in space. I didn't calculate.
Yeah, I was just kind of guessing at what the optimal flight plan would be, but I know it wouldn't be those straight lines.
That would be, but I assume it would be like.
Well, Brandon, you know what happens when you assume. This is why I absolutely love flat earthers, because they have no idea how to do any long distance navigation, but they certainly have an opinion on how it should be done. This has no bearing on reality. I showed you the actual ground track between Anchorage, Alaska and Mexico City. I'm not going to bother with it again.
He showed me the ground track, which was how you would fly over a stationary Earth. And this, accounting for the rotation of the Earth, has no bearing on reality. Exactly, Bob. That's exactly the point I was making. Are any bells going off in that shiny dome of yours?
But that's how you plan a flight. Now, next time when you want to put something like this out, why don't you have a chat with me, or Wolfie6020, or Blue Marble Science? We're all pilots. We all know how to do long-distance navigation over our beautiful rotating spherical Earth.
Notice how he says, over our beautiful rotating spherical Earth. This guy just loves the globe. He loves it. Oh my God. And those three names that he said, as if I would call any of those ones with a question about anything. They're basically globe propagandists.
We're happy to go ahead and give you some instruction on this and explain it to you to your satisfaction. And then maybe you won't come out and make silly videos like this one.
More ridicule, more insults, more psychological games, more, big-headed comments from Bob. Oh, God, this guy's just disgusting.
That just highlight your misunderstanding of the problem in the first place. Action. And then maybe you won't come out and make silly videos like this one.
Oh, I replayed it because just look at the smug look on this guy's face at the end here.
That just highlight your misunderstanding of the problem in the first place. Just trying to help out.
And then did you see that where he kind of winked and said, just trying to help out? Like he had rehearsed that. He wanted to make sure he got that line in there. Just trying to help out. I got to make sure I say that at this moment. And wink too. That'll be really cool.
Question number 3. Since the return flight from Mexico City to Anchorage can take advantage of the additional momentum imparted by moving from greater to lower rotation speeds and into Earth's rotation instead of against it, the total distance in space and engine effort required is significantly lower. The geodetic distance for the return flight is 3759, equivalent to the stationary Earth geodetic distance. Do pilots account for these differences in their flight plans?
Dear God, Brandon.
How is that not a legitimate question? The Earth is supposedly rotating. How do pilots have to take into account for the fact that they're flying over a giant spinning ball? Oh, what a stupid fucking question!
And I don't believe you actually did this. Are you trying to say that if I go from Anchorage, Alaska, down to Mexico City, when I go from Mexico City back to Anchorage, Alaska, it's going to be a different distance? The distance...
No, Bob, you're trying to say that. I'm trying to point out how stupid that is. And you're confirming it in both of these videos, how ludicrous the idea that the Earth is rotating below a plane flying is. You have done nothing but confirm the fact that the Earth isn't rotating. So with your flight expertise, I'm going to take it at face value, and your answer is the Earth isn't rotating. You don't need to worry about it. So I do appreciate the answers.
Between any 2 points on Earth does not change whether you go from point A to point B or point B to point A. This is kind of like a very basic concept that you should have probably learned in elementary school. Now, I've already demonstrated that the reason...
I just don't have anything to say.
reason that you're raising this question is that you do not understand how flight paths work over our spherical rotating Earth.
You know, there you go, spherical rotating. Yeah, Bob, I do understand. They work exactly like they would over a stationary Earth. I appreciate for helping me come to the understanding that the Earth isn't rotating, that it's stationary, and that pilots don't need to be concerned about it. Again, thank you very much. I don't know why you need to be an asshole about it.
It's the same as if it was a non-rotating spherical Earth. It's a great circle course.
It's the same as if it were a non-rotating spherical Earth.
Now, this little illustration that you put up, while it is interesting, it has no bearing on reality, and that's not a flight path.
I agree. It does not have a bearing on reality. That in reality, pilots don't need to be concerned with such things. Absolutely correct.
This is the flight path, and it doesn't matter if you're coming or going. It's...
Thank you. Yes, thank you again for confirming. And he's doing nothing but confirming that the Earth is stationary. I wonder if he realizes that.
It's the same flight path.
Meaning, do they account for the fuel requirement differences from going south to north and the distance that they travel through space and the increase in power that is required for them to gain momentum? Does anybody have any evidence that any of these considerations are accounted for when estimating fuel requirements for north to south or south to north flights?
I will tell you this. If the Earth was rotating, it would be more economic to go north than south in the northern hemisphere. And airlines sure the fuck would know what the most economical route was, given wherever they were on the globe. And we would have heard about it by now. We would know that.
So those are my three questions, and there's a whole bunch of other considerations that I didn't even get to yet that I want to see what people come back with and then address.
Well, there you have it. I addressed your three questions, Brandon.
Let's see how he closes it out here.
The reason I didn't address them in the first part was they were moot to begin with because I basically destroyed your entire concept of how flight planning was done. There's the flight plan.
You did?
Between Anchorage and Mexico City. I can't tell you this enough times. These other silly little flight tracings that you did, that you, in your flurf mind with your flat earth fantasy narrative, came up with, those have no basis in reality. Those are not the actual flight paths, nor the ground tracks.
That's true, because the Earth's stationary. Yes. All those flight paths that I put together above that rotating Earth were bullshit. Yes, absolutely, Bob is 100% correct. They have no bearing on reality because the Earth isn't rotating and pilots don't need to worry about it.
Of the aircraft that fly between Mexico City and Anchorage. So, hopefully that cleared it up.
All right. Sorry about that, guys, but I wanted to respond and I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time editing it. I hope this hasn't been completely boring. And if you haven't seen my original video, I suggest you go check it out. But I gotta say, I feel like Bob confirmed that the Earth is stationary. And in my opinion, if the Earth is stationary, then it's not a sphere. So this might be some of the best evidence, right from an expert's mouth, a pilot, that we've ever had in the flat Earth. That no considerations are required for rotation, whether you're going north or south. All pilots need to do is follow a ground track, and there's really not much in the way of corrections that need to be done because, like he said, you just like you're driving down the road, you just correct a little bit here and there, you barely even notice it. It's not really a consideration. It's nothing pilots give their attention to. There's no fuel economy differences between going north and south. And, you're going the speed, as Bob said, the airplane is going the speed of the ground beneath it, wherever it is, which is 0. So, Bob, thank you. Thank you very much for answering the 3 questions. I really appreciate your dishonesty. Thanks, dude. Peace.